Hello.
Oh,
Here he is.
Don't get too excited. I'm still not ready.
we have patience.
Like every doctor should.
Uh,
Why does my note say we're in chapter 7? We're not in chapter 7, are we?
Mm, 45.
Yeah,
47.
that means my bookmark is gone. Oh no, there it is. Okay, way back here. I have one study thing that's going in chapter 7, another in chapter 6. Okay, 45b1. Mi Kamina da Aved. Amar Mar, probably. Okay. 45b. And a little ways in. Amar Mar. I am not cuckoo. You may not say that about the rabbi. That's disrespectful. All right. Here we go.
There,
Amar.
45B.
We are off and running. 45b. I'm going to pull my coffee out of the Keurig. Bonnie, how would you like to read?
Okay. The master said in the Baraita that a stone was there, indicating that a special stone was kept in the place of stoning and used time and time again for this purpose. The Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in the Baraita, the stone with which the condemned party was stoned and the tree on which his corpse was hung, or the sword with which he was killed, or the cloth with which he was strangled, all of them are buried together with him? If so, the same stone could not have been used for every execution. The Gemara answers, no, it is necessary to teach that after the stones were buried with the transgressor, they would prepare other stones and bring them to the place of stoning in their place.
Okay, so in a Baraita that was quoted a little while ago, there was mention of the stone. And so the Hatanya, another Baraita, says that it couldn't be the same stone because the stones are disposed of and buried with him, right? That, by the way, is from Deuteronomy 21:23 that says, Lo talin nevela al eitz ki kavor tik berenu. You shall not allow a person to remain hanging on the tree all night. Rather, you shall surely bury him. And kavor tik berenu is understood by the rabbis to mean you shall bury, meaning you bury him and you bury the pole that he was impaled upon. Okay. Exciting, right? You needed to know that. Moving on, the Braita teaches, go ahead.
But before I read, but this way, if you know somebody was executed, you could tell by digging up the grave.
That's true, but you really shouldn't dig up graves anyways.
But, the Baraita teaches that all of the items used in the execution are buried together with the transgressor. The Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in another Baraita that they are not buried together with the transgressor? Rav Papa said, what does the Baraita mean when it says that these items are buried together with him? They are not actually buried together with him in the same grave. Rather, they are buried within his grasp, that is, in the area surrounding his grave.
Okay. So the problem is, and this is the fun of the Gemara. The later editor of this chapter has multiple sources, different Baraitot that contradict each other. They bury with the implements of the execution. They don't bury with the implements of the execution. So, a guy like me is not troubled. I say, you know what? They have conflicting traditions, mostly because there's very little evidence that this ever happened. So it's just a literary tradition, and they have different literary traditions. But if you're going to go back and say, no, everything in the Gemara happened the way it says, then if you have contradicting traditions. One of them has to be right, and one of them has to be wrong, and oh, that's a problem. And so the editor of the Gemara has a bigger problem than I do when he finds these Breitot in common. It either was or it wasn't. So he finds a compromise. It was buried near him. So the people who say it wasn't buried with him can feel happy, and the people who say it was buried with him can feel happy. Do you feel happy?
Yes.
As long as the archaeologists who dig it up are happy.
Yeah, the problem is that somebody's going to, dig up a grave one day and neither of these things happen. Something totally different is what they find in the grave. And then what do you do? Which is really what the conservative movement was based on in the late 1800s, early 1900s. There was all this archaeology. They were finding pots with documents in them in the sand. And the conservative movement said, positive historical Judaism. We have to deal with the archaeology and change what it means about what we believe.
Yeah. Didn't they, after a while, just combine him into a little container with his bones?
Yeah, well, the normal burial practice, whether or not someone was executed, is they would leave the body to desiccate, and then they would gather the remaining bones and put them in a stone coffin, and then shelve the stone coffin. That's a late Second Temple practice in Roman times. It's called using an ossuary. An ossuary.
So would they bring the stone with them then, or what are they doing the secondary?
Yeah, no, obviously there's no stone being buried in the ossuary. So,
So,
this does not reflect, like you went with me to Beit Sharim, you and Maria, on the trip. I think, Bonnie, did you and Louis make it to Beit Sharim, the burial place? Or were you on a different trip?
I was 2014.
I don't know what I did on which trip.
No, we didn't. No, we didn't.
yeah, we saw the cave.
Who was on the synagogue mosaic trip? Okay, the synagogue mosaic trip went to a place called Beit Sharim, where we went into a cave and we saw some of these ossuaries.
Right.
You remember that, Ron?
Yes, I did. That's why I brought
Right,
it up.
and there's no evidence whatsoever. Now, then again, you could say, but we went to the graves of the righteous. So, of course, you wouldn't find execution tools in the graves of the righteous.
That's true. The rabbis were there, yes.
And all rabbis are righteous. Why are you laughing at that? All right.
I don't know.
Stop it. We'll stop right there. Amar Shmuel. Go ahead, Bonnie.
All right, Shmuel says, if the witness's hands were severed after the transgressor was sentenced to be stoned, so that they can no longer stone him themselves, the transgressor is exempt from punishment and is not executed.
I love that rule. All you have to do is chop off your witness's hands.
Yeah.
What is the reason for this? This is because I need to fulfill what is stated in the verse. The hand of the witnesses shall be first upon him to put him to death. And here this is not possible.
Beautiful.
Why would you have hands cut off?
So if you find somebody is a witness who testifies against your loved one and get them convicted of murder, before the execution, just go to their house, chop off their hands. You won't be convicted of murder, and your loved one won't be executed for murder. You might lose your hands, eye for an eye kind of thing, but hey, it's worth it, right?
Someone could just pick up their hands and use their hands.
What are they going to pick up their hands with?
And then push it hands upon hands, I mean.
They didn't know about prostheses. That's what they didn't know.
Oh, well.
But the hands were cut off after the sentence, but before it was carried out.
If they had their hands cut off after the sentencing, before the execution, the person doesn't get executed because the witnesses don't have hands to throw the rocks.
But why were the witnesses' hands cut off?
Well, they probably stole something or something. I don't know.
So that they were
Hey,
in on
Bonnie?
the time.
This has all the earmarks of the Stam of the Gemara having fun with us. Like, it's a real thing, but the editor is really overthinking things. Like, and by the way, since the hand of the witness shall be first to him, what if the witness has lost his hand?
All right, so the Gemara asks, if that is so, that the witnesses themselves must stone the transgressor, or else the sentence is not carried out. If the witnesses lacked hands from the outset, when they offered their testimony, are they also disqualified?
So are you
Gemara,
disqualified as a witness if you don't have any arms. You don't have arms. You witnessed a murder. Because you don't have the ability to execute the person, you are now invalidated as a witness.
ah,
Is that
Gemara-
so? So the Gemara says,
There it is different, as the verse states, the hand of the witnesses, indicating that the hands that were there already when the witnesses gave their testimony must throw the first stone when the transgressor is executed. If the witnesses already lacked hands at the time of their testimony, others can throw the first stone.
it's different because it wasn't talking about the witnessing, it was talking about the executing. Therefore, not having hands as a witness doesn't disqualify you. Thank God. Okay. See, this is our version of disabilities inclusion.
Okay. The Gemara raises an objection to the opinion of Shmuel from what is taught in a Mishnah. In any place where two witnesses testify before a court and say, we testify about so-and-so that his death sentence was issued in such and such a court, and so-and-so and so-and-so were his witnesses, he is executed, and there is no need to retry him. This seems to indicate that the transgressor is put to death even if the witnesses are not there to throw the first stone. The Gemara explains, Shmuel interpreted the Mishnah as referring to a case where the witnesses who testify about the transgressor's conviction in a different court are the same witnesses who had testified against him at his original trial, and they are present to throw the first stone.
Yeah, well, and that's obviously not what it was. But okay, so we have another difficulty. The Stam, the editor of the Gemara, is just bringing us case after case after case, all these little scenarios and how do they play out in the law. So, okay, so somebody was convicted. Ron was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. And he flees to New Mexico. And two of the people who were in the courtroom and saw the conviction and the death sentence issued by the judges back in New Jersey are present in New Mexico. I don't know, bounty hunters or something. And they go to the local court in New Mexico with Ron in hand, and they say, we two witnesses swear or testify that this man was convicted and sentenced to death in New Jersey. And there's no extradition treaties back then. The court in New Mexico, on the basis of those two witnesses, execute Ron. What's the problem with that?
What if the witnesses are lying?
Right, well, you've got the whole Adim Zomamim thing. So if these are lying witnesses, you have to try and adjure them, and did you know, and blah, blah, blah. But the problem is you have, I love this case. It's putting into conflict two different rules of rabbinic jurisprudence. One rule, it's very clearly said in the Torah, al pi shnaim yakum davar. On the basis of two witnesses, anything can be proven in court. You need two witnesses to prove anything in court. So they're not proving that he murdered the person, upon which he would be tried and found guilty and executed. They're proving that he was convicted of a crime and should be killed. So they're not witnesses to the murder in the case of Shmuel. So you have two people who didn't see the murder, whose testimony will get this guy executed for murder. Right? So that's a problem, right? That seems to be a problem. Logically, it's correct, but practically, it seems like a bad scenario. So the editor of the Gemara comes in and says, no, that Shmuel was talking about a case when it was the original two witnesses who in New Mexico, and again testified that he was convicted, so they don't need to retry him because they're also the witnesses that would win in a trial, which is really hedging your bets, right? Why do they need to be the witnesses who saw the murder when what they're testifying to is the conviction, not the murder? Doesn't make sense that you would need them to be the witnesses, except for it makes us feel squeamish. We don't feel convinced. If he's just they're testifying to the conviction, I don't know. Can we convict somebody on the testimony of witnesses who are testifying about a court?
But this doesn't always have to be death, someone killing someone. It could be idol worshiping, no? I mean, here? Or is this only, death? Killing someone?
It's also adultery.
There's many death sentences that you could give in Jewish law.
That's true. So Shmuel doesn't seem to be talking about specifically stoning or murder. He's just saying anytime that two witnesses say somebody was convicted and sentenced to death, on the basis of those two witnesses, you can convict him.
Right. Again, yeah.
But they are present to throw the first stone.
If it's stoning.
Yeah.
But remember, the logic added that in. That's not actually in the text of the Gemara. That line there is being added by the logic
Yeah.
of the translator.
I think it's
Okay.
it's
Okay.
really more of an interpretation than translation. Yeah.
Umi ba'inan. We're not going to leave it at that. You didn't think we were going to leave it at that, did you?
No. Okay.
Go ahead.
The Gemara raises another difficulty against the opinion of Shmuel. But do we really need to fulfill what is stated in the verse exactly as it is written? But isn't it taught in the Baraita? The verse with regard to a murderer states, "He that smote him shall be put to death, for he is a murderer." I have derived only that the murderer is put to death with the mode of execution written concerning him, that is decapitation. From where do I derive that if you cannot put him to death with the mode of execution written concerning him? For example, if he is escaping from the court, you can put him to death with any mode of execution with which you can put him to death. The verse states, "He that smote him shall be put to death," where the doubled verb teaches that he is put to death in any case by any mode of execution. Here too, the condemned party should be executed even if the witnesses cannot cast the first stone.
Our famous mot yumat again.
Okay. So we're back to the case of the witness with no hands, right? So the Gemara is saying, wait a minute. Who says it has to be stoning just because it was stoning? What if you don't have any stones? Right? What if you're convicted of a stoning offense on a ship at sea? You have to take the ship to someplace that has rocks? Or do you execute the person any way you can? What do you all think?
Any way you can.
It says any way you can. Yeah. It says.
So he flees to New Mexico. We can kill him by the sword if we want to, as long as the court allows it. Well, we're going to get an objection. Shane Hatem. Well, no, that case is different concerning our murderer because, why?
He that smote him shall be put to death, which serves to include all modes of execution.
He that smote him shall be put to death. Okay, so
We cannot hear you, Rabbi.
The remote shall be put to death.
I guess I'll have to phone in.
Rabbi, we can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, but we're missing-
Okay, so in that case, then let it teach the words differently. If it's any mode of execution, then let it say this. Go ahead.
The Gemara asks, but why not learn from this halacha a principle that can be applied in all cases of capital punishment? The Gemara responds, this case does not prove a principle because the halachot of the murderer and of the blood redeemer, that is a relative of one who was killed, who takes it upon himself to redeem his relative's death, are two verses that come as one. And the rule is that two verses that come as one do not teach a principle. In other words, if a halacha is stated in the Torah with regard to two individual cases, the halacha is understood to apply only to those cases. Had the halacha applied to all other relevant cases as well, it would not have been necessary for the Torah to teach it twice. The fact that two cases are mentioned indicates that they are the exceptions rather than the rule.
Okay, so contrary to what you might have thought, if it teaches something once, it can apply to everything. If it teaches the same thing twice, it only applies to those two cases. Rabbinic logic.
Yeah.
Okay, go on.
So it's just like many of the cases are repeated in Deuteronomy again. So what we get for laws in Shemot and Bamidbar, they again come up again many times in Devarim.
That is correct.
Yeah. I would think even most of them, you know, but and even in Kedushim, many of the ones in Kedushim are repeated again, I think. So,
Also correct.
yeah. Oh, well.
All right, Bonnie, keep going.
Right, the Gemara explains the halacha that capital punishment need not necessarily be imposed in accordance with the Torah's specific instructions is taught with regard to two cases, that of the murderer and that of the blood redeemer. The case of a murderer is this halacha that we said with regard to the case of a blood redeemer. What is it? As it is taught in Baraita, the verse states, the blood redeemer shall slay the murderer when he meets him. This mitzvah of redeeming the death caused by an unintentional killer falls on the blood redeemer, a relative of the victim. And from where is it derived that if the victim has no blood redeemer, the court appoints a blood redeemer for him, as it is stated, when he meets him, which teaches that in any case he shall slay the murderer, whether he is a relative or a court-appointed blood redeemer.
Okay, not very tight logic, and we don't really get why these words necessarily mean that. But they are saying that you have the ability to act as a blood redeemer as a court if there is no blood redeemer, which is ironic since the whole system of the court really does eliminate the blood redeemer revenge killing system. The revenge killing system is not functioning in the time of the rabbis for sure because you have courts of law. So
This has got to do with the 5 cities of refuge, and they could, if they got to one of the 5 cities, they could not be killed. Is that correct? Under the
theoretically, but we have no evidence those cities existed. So the Mishnah can't point to those cities in its own day. It points to cities in the ancient past, but during the Second Temple times, there are no cities of refuge up and functioning.
Oh, okay. You know that. It's good to know.
All right. Mar Kashisha.
Mar Kashisha, son of Rav Chizda, said to Rav Ashi, and do we not need to fulfill what is stated in the verse exactly as it is written? But didn't we learn in a Mishnah with regard to a stubborn and rebellious son, if one of the boy's parents is without a hand, or is mute, or lame, or blind, or deaf, if the boy is not rendered a stubborn and rebellious son?
All right, so we've got this Ish Sorer Umoreh. You've got the Ben Sorer Umoreh. You've got the rebellious son who insults his parents and nobody can do anything with him. And they put him in front of the court and he's convicted and he's executed for being a rebellious son. There is a Mishnah that says if a parent is incapable of either testifying against their child or executing them with the court's blessing, that the child cannot be convicted of being in this category.
Do they have an age limit for child rebelling?
Probably, but again, there's no evidence that this ever happened, and the rabbinic system has all kinds of developments making it nearly impossible to convict a child in this way. So it's legislated out of existence. This is just cherry-picking one of those rules that makes it impossible to convict a kid of being this. So,
Okay.
Okay.
Shnei Amar, as it is said,
Okay, this halacha is derived as it is stated. Then shall his father and his mother lay hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his city and to the gate of his place. This serves to teach his father and mother lay hold of him, but not those without a hand who cannot grab him, and bring him out, but not those who are lame and cannot take him out. And it is stated, and they shall say to the elders of his city, this our son is stubborn and rebellious. He does not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. This verse serves to teach, and they shall say, but not mute people, this is our son, but not the blind who cannot point to the boy. He does not obey our voice, but not the deaf.
okay, so is this being horribly uninclusive and prejudicial against people with disabilities, or is this being kind by legislating this entire halacha out of existence?
I think it's being kind.
What do the rest of you think?
I'm having trouble understanding it.
So the idea is that because the law says the parents shall take their child and testify this child is a glutton and a drunkard and a rebellious son. So if they don't have a hand, they can't take the child out. If they can't bring him out, if they are lame, if the parents can't walk, they can't bring him out. If the parents are mute, they can't say this is so-and-so our son. If they're blind, they can't indicate who their son is in the courtroom. If they are deaf, they can't testify that he doesn't pay attention to our voice because he might be saying, yes, mom, every time we talk, but you're deaf. What do you know? So in one sense, this is making it so that people with these physical limitations cannot testify in court or cannot be effective. On the other hand, by doing all these rules, you're making it more difficult to convict the child, which might be an act of mercy. So is this cruelty by not allowing people with disabilities to testify, or is this mercy by letting the no good, rotten kid off the hook?
Didn't we have something like this before? This rings a bell.
I'm not sure. I don't recall the Ben Sorera Moray coming up before, but
I mean, not this detailed, but I seem to remember, running into this before in class.
well, the rabbinic system does not let people who are deaf, dumb, or mute speak in court, like testify in court. So that we've seen before.
No, but with the
After the
child,
mute
no,
one.
this specific instance, it rings a bell. And
Same.
it's one way of, okay, so they legislated it out of existence.
Maybe. I mean, if your parents don't have a disability, you can still be in trouble. Go on, my Tama.
What is the reason that in all these cases the boy is not rendered a stubborn and rebellious son? It is not because we need to fulfill what is stated in the verse exactly as it is written, and this principle should hold true with regard to other verses as well.
That's a question, not a statement. Not it is not, but is it not?
Yeah, but it's too long to ask. All right.
What is the reason that the boy's not convicted? Isn't it because we need to do what's just written in the verse? Gemara objects. No. Go on.
No, there in the case of the stubborn and rebellious son, it is different as the entire verse is superfluous. Therefore, all of the conditions inferred from the verse must be precisely met, or else the boy cannot be rendered a stubborn and rebellious son. One cannot apply this principle to other verses.
Okay, so again, rabbinic logic. Because you could say this is a rebellious, the rebellious son should be executed, right? You could have just said that. But because it's got all this stuff you didn't need, and it's only written in one place, therefore we're going to say we need every single thing written in there. But you can't apply that to other verses. And now we're going to do a tashma coming here from another Baraita, from a different case to try and prove our point. Go ahead.
The Gemara suggests, come and hear a proof from what is taught in a Baraita with regard to an idolatrous city, the majority of whose inhabitants engaged in idol worship, about which the verse states, and you shall gather all the spoil of it into the midst of the open place of the city, and shall burn with fire both the city and the entire plunder taken in it. If the city does not have an open place, it is not rendered an idolatrous city. This is the statement of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Akiva says if it does not have an open place, they make an open place for it.
Okay, so the school of Rabbi Yishmael says, because the Torah says, if you have a wayward city, you take all their stuff to its open place and you burn it. And Rabbi Yishmael says, so if it doesn't have an open place, you can't do it, so you can't convict them. Rabbi Akiva says, get the bulldozer out and create an open space. Go on.
The Gemara explains, Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva disagree only with regard to this detail. That one sage, Rabbi Yishmael, holds that we need an open place that existed from the outset when the idolatry was committed, while the other sage, Rabbi Akiva, holds that an open place that exists now is like an open place that existed from the outset. But everyone agrees that we need to fulfill what is stated in the verse exactly as it is written.
Okay, so they both agree that you have to do everything that's in the verse. The only question is, can you create the conditions to allow you to do it? Which wouldn't work in the missing hand because you can't have them grow back a hand.
The Gemara
How can you not
answers.
have an open space?
What's that?
How can you not have an open space? There's always an open space.
Maybe they got convicted in Jersey City.
Yeah.
It's all built up everywhere.
Yeah, in the ghetto, you wouldn't have had to say an open space. Everything was jammed up. A slum, everything's jammed up.
Maybe. All right, go on.
Right? The Gemara answers, this issue is the subject of a dispute between Tanaim. As we learned in a Mishnah concerning the purification process of a leper.
Okay, hang on. Before we get into it, when the Gemara says it's a machloket Tanaim, it's an argument between two Tanaim. That is the one circumstance where the Gemara does not need to resolve the disputes. Okay? Two Tanaim are allowed to disagree with each other. We might interpret it in such a way to find where they don't disagree, but it's okay to leave a machloket Tanaim at that level. It's only when a Moraim are discussing or something like that we have a problem. All right, go on.
As we learned in a Mishnah concerning the purification process of a leper, during the course of which blood and oil must be applied to his right thumb, right big toe, and right ear. If the leper has no right thumb, right big toe, or right ear, he can never attain ritual purity, as he cannot fulfill the conditions of the verse. Rabbi Eliezer says, in such a case, the priest may apply the blood and oil to the place where the missing finger, toe, or ear should have been, and the leper has thereby fulfilled his obligation. Rabbi Shimon says the priest may apply it to his left thumb, left big toe, or left ear, and the leper has thereby fulfilled his obligation. The first Tana apparently holds that the Torah's instructions must be fulfilled exactly as they are written, while Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon disagree and say that when this is impossible, they are dispensable. And I can't see any more on the screen. Okay, it's the end there.
Doesn't leprosy cause the things like fingers and ears to fall off?
The leprosy of the Torah is more like skin flakiness. You don't actually have things blackening and falling off the body. So it's Mitzora. Leprosy is always a horrible translation.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not Hansen's disease.
Okay, we made it through all of that. Yeshikoach. New Mishnah. Go on.
The corpses of all those who are stoned are hung after their death. This is a statement of Rabbi Eliezer. And the rabbis say, only the corpse of the blasphemer who has cursed God and the corpse of the idol worshiper are hung.
Okay. Hang on a second. There's more.
Right, more, keep, can you scroll?
Go on.
Yeah.
The corpse of a man is hung facing the people, but the corpse of a woman, out of modesty, is hung with facing the tree. This is the statement of Rabbi Eliezer. And the rabbis say, the corpse of a man is hung, but the corpse of a woman is not hung. Rabbi Eliezer said to the rabbis, did Shimon ben Shatach not hang in Ashkelon women who were found guilty of witchcraft, proving that the corpse of a woman who was executed is also hung? They said to him, no proof can be brought from here, as he hanged 80 women on that day, and the halacha said, the halacha is that the same court may not judge even two people charged with capital transgressions on the same day. It is therefore clear that he was not acting in accordance with Torah law, but rather his execution of the 80 women was an extraordinary punishment necessitated by unusually pressing circumstances.
Wow.
That's about
That case keeps coming up, so there has to be some historical truth to it. But okay, so in other words, he did it, but that doesn't mean he should have.
This is about the third time I think this has come up.
Yeah.
Well, we're just re-quoting the Mishnah from where it originally occurred, but it gets engaged in the Gemara multiple times as well.
Yeah. It's a very disturbing one because it doesn't seem like it's really keeping to halacha, this whole idea of just, killing so many people at one time. And again, it's as you were saying, it's hard to imagine if this did not happen. I don't know. You say that the courts never executed any. Well, I guess they're saying this is outside of the purview.
Yeah, this is what we would call extrajudicial killings. I mean, I don't know that Shimon ben Shetach had a rabbinic court in that sense. I know that's blasphemy to say, but
Yeah. No,
he's the beginning of rabbinic Judaism. He doesn't have a lot of rabbis running around.
Right. So.
There was a lot of civil war going on in those days. So
A lot of what, Morris?
civil war going on.
Civil War. Yeah, yeah.
And so maybe they hung 60 people because there was a civil war and they killed their enemies.
What are approximately what year was this that this occurred? Do we know?
Shimon ben Shetach,
Yeah.
he's before the Common Era.
100 BCE probably.
Yeah, like Hasmonean. It's
Yeah. Right.
So
it's
during
like
the first
Hanukkah-ish.
temple. So
Yeah.
before the second temple.
No.
No, during the Second Temple,
During.
Bef-
Okay.
but before Roman times, before the Romans show up. So it's under the Hasmoneans. It's after Hanukkah. It's a Jewish land, and the Hasmonean kings are in power. And Shimon ben Shetach does this up north during that time. Morris is right, about 100 before the Common Era.
Right.
Okay.
Gemara.
The Mishnah teaches that the corpses of all those who are killed by stoning are hung after their death. The sages taught in a related Baraita, the verse states, "And if a man has committed a sin worthy of death, and he is put to death, and you shall hang him on a tree." One might have thought that the corpses of all those who are put to death are hung. To counter this, the verse states, "His body shall not remain all night upon the tree, for he that is hung is a curse of God," teaching that just as the blasphemer who is liable to be punished by stoning is hung after his death, so too all those who are liable to be punished by stoning are later hung, but those who are liable to be executed in other ways are not hung after their death. This is a statement of Rabbi Eliezer.
The Baraita continues.
And the rabbis say, just as the blasphemer who denies the principle of belief in God is hung after his death, so too all who deny the principle of belief in God are hung after they die. But others, even if they are liable to be punished by stoning, are not hung after they are put to death.
Okay, so hanging up your dead body is obviously adding insult to injury. It's a denigration of the person who was executed. So now they're going to say it's just in the case of stoning, it doesn't happen to everyone, or maybe it happens to everyone, or maybe it's only people who denied the basic belief in God who should be hung up in this way. Go on.
The Gemara clarifies with regard to what do they disagree. The rabbis interpret the verses based on the principle of generalizations and details, one of the methods by which this Torah is interpreted. And Rabbi Eliezer interprets them based on the principle of amplifications and restrictions, a different approach to biblical exegesis.
It would go way too long for me to go through what those are. Let's just move on.
How so? The rabbis expound the verses based on the principle of generalizations and details. The phrase, "and he is put to death, and you shall hang him," is a generalization, as no particular offense is specified. The phrase, "for he that is hung is a curse of God," is a detail, as a specific transgression is mentioned. Were the generalization and the detail next to each other in the same verse, we would apply the principle of generalizations and details and say that the generalization includes only that which is stated in the detail. Therefore, this transgressor, the blasphemer, yes, his corpse is subject to being hung after he is executed, but the corpse of anyone else is not.
Okay, so if you're ever in synagogue 5 minutes into the service, before the Kaddish de Rabbanan, you'll see a page that's Rabbi Yishmael Haya, the 12 hermeneutical principles of Rabbi Yishmael for the interpretation of the Torah. And this idea of klal ufrat, frat uklal, whether if you have a general rule followed by a limitation or a detail followed by a general rule, does the limitation come to exemplify the general rule, or does it come to limit the general rule, etc.? There's this whole systemic way of dealing with Torah verses when it has a example followed by an example, or general rule followed by an example, or a couple of specifics followed by a general rule. Does it create a general rule, or is it limited only to the examples? We don't need to go into it. That's what they just did. All you need to know is that's what they just did. And we're going to continue here for a little bit, but just run with it.
Now that the generalization and the detail are distant from each other, that is, they are written in different verses, The verses serve to include one who was found guilty of idol worship, as he is similar to the blasphemer in all matters. He too is subject to be hung after he is executed. And Rabbi Eliezer, by contrast, interprets the verses based on the principle of amplifications and restrictions. The phrase, "and he is put to death, and you shall hang him," is an amplification. The phrase, "for he that is hung is a curse of God," is a restriction. Were the amplification and the restriction right next to each other, we would apply the principle of amplifications and restrictions and include only one who is guilty of idol worship, as he is similar to the blasphemer in all ways. Now that they are distant from each other, the verses serve to include all those who are liable to be stoned to death. All of their corpses are hung after they are put to death.
Okay, so it seems like it's, nitpicking between how you interpret Torah, but the implication practically for what you do or don't do is huge, right? So they considered these to be very important because the outcomes are different. Go on.
The Mishnah teaches that according to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, the corpse of a man is hung facing the people while the corpse of a woman is hung facing the tree. Whereas the rabbis say that the corpse of a woman is not hung at all. The Gemara asks, what is the reasoning behind the opinion of the rabbis? The Gemara answers, as the verse states, "And if a man has committed a sin worthy of death, and he is put to death, and you shall hang him on a tree," which teaches that you shall hang him on a tree after his death, but you shall not hang her on a tree after her death. And Rabbi Eliezer would respond that the inference to be drawn from this verse is that after his death they hang him by himself without his clothing. The Gemara
If it said oto and not ota, which would mean her, they're going to say it only applies to men. Okay, go on.
The Gemara asked, and from where do the rabbis derive that the corpse of the executed man is hung without his clothing? The Gemara answers, yes, it is indeed so that they agree that the word him teaches that the corpse is hung without clothing. But the source of their ruling is the verse that states, "And if a man has committed a sin," which indicates that a man is hung after he is put to death, but a woman is not hung after she is put to death.
Okay, so again, there's a verse that says, "If a man has committed a sin," and then it goes on, "he shall be executed," blah, blah, blah. And so they're going to say that verse doesn't apply to a woman, and it's from that verse that they derive the hanging on the tree. Okay. By the way, that verse also says they should be killed. So you might say it doesn't apply to women, she shouldn't be killed, but they don't do that.
The Gemara asked, and as for Rabbi Eliezer, what does he learn from this clause of the verse? "And if a man has committed a sin?" Reish Lakish says that clause of the verse serves to exclude a stubborn and rebellious son,
Ta-da.
who, according to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, is not hung after he is executed because he is not a man. The Gemara raises a difficulty, but isn't it taught explicitly in the Baraita, a stubborn and rebellious son is first stoned and afterward his corpse is hung? This is the statement of Rabbi Eliezer. Rather, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says that part of the verse comes to include a stubborn and rebellious son, that his corpse is also hung. What is the reason for this? The Gemara explains, as the verse states, "And if a man has committed a sin," indicating that only the corpse of a man is hung, but not that of a child, thereby excluding a stubborn and rebellious son. And the word sin indicates that only the corpse of one who is put to death on account of a sin is hung, to the exclusion of a stubborn and rebellious son, who is executed not because of a sin that he has already committed, but on account of what he is likely to do in the future. This is an example of a restrictive expression following a restrictive expression, as both expressions indicate that a stubborn and rebellious son is not hung after he is put to death. And there is a hermeneutical principle that a restrictive expression following a restrictive expression serves only to amplify the halacha and include additional cases. In this case, it serves to teach that the corpse of a stubborn and rebellious son is hung after he is put to death.
Okay.
That means you don't have to be 13 years old to be punished.
No.
Because he may do in the future, it says.
Exactly. The Ben Sorero Moray is highly problematic because the kid hasn't done anything other than disrespect mother and father. He hasn't killed anybody. He hasn't stolen anybody. And he's just a drunkard and a jerk. And they're going to execute him because he's not worth it.
I think there's, this is very troubling because it's before someone has committed the crime. You're saying, well, he's potentially going to do these types of crimes, so let's just knock him off before he does the crime.
Right. So, which is probably why they try and legislate it out of existence.
Yeah.
Let's do just a little bit more here, and then we're going to knock off a little early today because I got to run. Go
right.
on. Oh, no, this is Eliezer Shimon ben Shetach. Let me see if it's the right place to stop. This is the right place to stop, actually. This is a little break. This is going back to Shimon ben Shetach, but it's a new topic that goes on for a little while. So let's hold it here, okay?
Okay.
We're on 46a. Amar Lahen Rabbi Eliezer V'halo Shimon ben Shetach. Okay, folks, good to have you back in the saddle, Stuart.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your help.
Yep, and we'll see you on Monday. Now, I'll let you know, Monday I'm here, and then I'm on vacation for the next 2 Mondays. So the 16th and the 23rd, I will not be here. But I'm back on the... No, today's the 3rd. So I'm here on the 10th. The 17th and the 24th, I'm not here. But the 31st, I am.
Okay. Have a good vacation. Well, we'll see you next week.
Enjoy.
anyway.
I'll see you next week. Okay, that's just planning ahead.
All right.
Talk to you later.
Bye now.
Bye.